Hello? You alright?
I made Last Night because I hadn't made a film of any kind for over 5 years, and it was kind of depressing me really. I'd spent a lot of time developing feature film projects, and I'd neglected my my original talent of directing. And I think if you're a passionate filmmaker, you know, I think that slowly eats away at you. And I was desperate to get back and be creative and be on set and do stuff. And so that's what kind of motivated me. I was also aware of the fact that short film funding was not really fashionable anymore. It was more about feature film funding, and so it was hard to get funding from the normal channels. I was also acutely aware of, having sort of left the film industry for a while to bring up my daughter, having come back, the sort of landscape had changed, and people were addressing, and quite rightly so, gender and equality and diversity and stuff, but I felt that I had been excluded from some of those things, and that's a perception, not necessarily the truth. And I was kind of a bit disturbed by that, by having that perception, because I didn't know whether it was true or not, and I didn't know whether I was just grabbing at straws for not getting funding. But I think also I was just fed up of the idea of, when you get funding, having to have restrictions to what you're doing based on that funding. So the idea was to find a way of making more films on a regular basis that I could self-fund or self-finance in some way, so that I had the creative freedom, I could do what I wanted. And so Last Night was the first of these, of hopefully many. And yeah, and that's what it is. It was a way to for me to find out a way how to make films, again, on a regular basis. We shot on an iPhone because I had no money. I had no equipment. I had no way of. I had no finances to be able to rent what I would consider normal production, a production package, or to self-finance a short. You know, the last short I'd been awarded was for £20,000, and I was used to sort of that kind of money for making a short. So the idea to go back to something a lot smaller, which was last night was actually in fact £3,000. But in that £3,000, only £1,000 of it was sort of expenses. The £2,000 was purchasing all the equipment that I needed, and some of it was second hand, some of it was brand new. But that's something that I couldn't have done 20 years ago. It was unheard of, and so that's why I kind of got quite excited by it. And also, just, you know, filmmaking is changing constantly. I mean, it's moving far forward so fast, and I love kind of trying to keep up with everything. And I did a lot of research on iPhone filmmaking and gadgets and stuff, and bits and bobs you can add to the iPhone. And so I wanted to try those out. I wanted to experiment. I wanted to be a more innovative filmmaker and a more resourceful filmmaker, because I knew if I could be at the forefront of this technology, I would stay in the game. You know, I'd still have a chance to be noticed. And if I was doing something differently and more exciting than anybody else, it didn't matter if I was a white, straight, abled, middle class guy. All those labels wouldn't matter. The idea for Last Night is kind of a second-hand idea, really. It wasn't the intended idea. My intention was to work with with a group of young unemployed people living on the Isle of Sheppey, which is a particularly deprived area of Kent, and run some improvisation workshops where we develop a story together, and then we go out and make the film, and they would star and also take on roles on the film. And it was a great idea, and I really wanted to do it. It's just when you're dealing with vulnerable people like that, it's there's a lot of red tape, kind of to protect you and to protect them, and it just got in the way in the end, and I had to sort of abandon it in the end. So I was desperate to make a film by the end of the year, and I thought, well, I need something. What can I do? And I'd just been remastering my student film Blackout from 1996, and I was watching it thinking, how would I do that today if I was a student today? Not just technically, but in terms of the story, how audiences' expectations and tastes changed in 20 years. And so that kind of sort of grew, the idea of that, the curiosity of that grew, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to reimagine the premise of Blackout, and so I flipped it on its head, and that's where we are, really, yeah. The original short, Blackout, was all about me being a beta male in a predominantly alpha male city of Newcastle. It was a football city, and I didn't feel very comfortable there at all while I was at university. And so it was really sort of me coming to terms with that kind of world and exploring my own masculinity and where I lay in that spectrum. And so when we decided to reimagine Blackout as Last Night, although the story itself, I had nothing to say in it, it's just an exciting premise that I wanted to see where it led. I did want to play with gender. There's been a lot of stuff about gender politics lately and misunderstandings about it, I think. So what I was trying to do was explore gender in film, and by flipping Blackout on its head and having a female lead, to see what would happen, if anything, that would change the story because they were female rather than male. And actually what I learnt was it's not about whether they're male or female. Being male or female has absolutely no relevance at all. It's just the same as being black or white or being gay or straight. It's not, they don't make character, that's just who you are, as in labels you give yourself. It's what you do, it's the actions that you do that tell people who you are. And so it's more about levels of masculinity and femininity in an individual and how they play out. The biggest challenges for me making Last Night were just simply having to do everything. I mean, I didn't really have any backup. I wanted a producer on board, but all the producers I knew were either, like me, were parents and busy, or they had other jobs that they were tied down. They couldn't commit 3 days, never mind 3 nights, out and about making films. So I was forced to produce myself, and I'm not afraid of producing. It's just I don't particularly enjoy it. But it was a distraction. If you're trying to direct and you're trying to think of all the sort of practicalities on set, it's very distracting. I was also, I didn't have a cinematographer. I would have loved a cinematographer, though I did get a buzz out of operating the camera. I hadn't operated a camera for 20 years, and so even though it's an iPhone, it did feel good. And I'd definitely consider doing sort of B camera on a film in the future if I had a DOP. But definitely would have liked a DOP because it's kind of lonely. If you do it on your own, it's lonely. And although I had 4 assistants, there were students. They were relatively inexperienced, and I was kind of having to train them on the job. And I kind of regret not taking the time to sort of meet with them first and just go through all the equipment and all the process of what how I like to work, because we wasted a lot of time just me having to explain stuff, and it was my fault for not doing that before. So that's what that's really it. It's just not having enough time or mental time, just sort of thought time to be fully creative and to concentrate on the things that are important to you. I.e., for me, it's obviously directing and telling the story rather than having to produce or work out whether a light needs to go there or tweak it that way or that way. There's a few things I've learned from this experience. One is that there's nothing wrong in making films on an iPhone. You can make absolutely gripping, enjoyable, entertaining films. It's not about how big your camera is. It's about storytelling, and that's it. And people will be forgiving for poor image quality, But we know that already with things like Blair Witch or 28 Days Later, and people just want to be entertained As long as you're doing that, I don't think the image quality matters. Also, just to embrace fear. I mean, on the first night, again, I said I didn't have any experienced crew on board, and there was 4 students that were kind of expecting me to be competent, and I was crapping myself. And when it started raining on the first day, I was just there was a point where I just wanted to run home to my wife and child, close the door, and just go, "That's really embarrassing. I shouldn't have done it. I shouldn't have even thought of it." But the rain stopped, and we cracked on, and I got the adrenaline rush, and I got the buzz, and I just thought, "Oh, I'm so glad I did this." The biggest mistake, I suppose, or regret, was casting. And I kind of rushed the casting because I was running out of time. And initially I was going to do video auditions, so people did their iPhone audition and sent it to me, and then I was going to shortlist those people and then meet them face to face and mix them around and do stuff like that. But I didn't have time, and I was worried that if I left it any later, it would get too cold to be able to do a night shoot. And it was pretty cold at some points in October, and that was mild, I would say, for October. So I didn't do that, and so I picked I kind of rushed my choices, didn't get to know my actors well enough beforehand. Secondly, I had hardly any good actors for the role of Tony, which surprised me because I thought Tony was the most interesting character of them all. He was the most complex character. And Rue was the only good one. And I had a Sarah I wanted to use, but she didn't match Rue, as in I wouldn't have believed that they would be best friends. So I had to cast, normally you would cast around Sarah, the main character, but with this occasion I had to cast around Rue. So I had to find an actress that most fitted Rue and an actor that most fitted Rue. So I got a very different film to what I was hoping to get. I think I wanted to get I wanted actors that were sort of a little bit more on the edges of society, a little bit more dangerous, because then the premise itself would play out a bit more dangerously. So that I was kind of a bit disappointed with. And then the third thing was just having a read through. I never sat down with the actors and had a read through, because I realised there was a scene where we were by the car and stuff, and one of the actors was delivering their lines, and I thought, he's not delivering it seriously enough, and it was almost like a throwaway, casual comment, and it might have been just because he'd lost focus a little bit, but I never corrected him because my head was swimming with too many things, and so I went with what we had, and so that was my, again, if we'd sat down and gone through the script in detail, and they'd delivered their line like that, I would have had the time to go, oh, actually, I didn't mean it like this, I mean it like this, or you could be a little bit more cautious about that line, or whatever the direction that you needed to give that actor. So there were occasions where I didn't do my job on set because we just didn't have time, and I feel I let the actors down, but ultimately, if I let the actors down, I let myself down, because then the film is never as good as it should be. So I think that was the biggest lesson I learned. Last night was always an experiment for me, and nothing more. And the reason why I wanted it to be an experiment because I think I was scared about how rusty I would be, but I was hoping to obviously make a better film than Blackout. 20 years of filmmaking experience. If it wasn't better, then I would be feeling a bit ashamed of myself. But the reason why it's better is not necessarily just because of my 20 years experience. It's also because you can make films faster and quicker, and you can get into smaller places, and it's less bulky. I mean, the 16mm camera, we did a couple of Steadicam sort of handheld shots going through the woods and stuff, and it's quite wobbly and stuff. But the iPhone, I think we put it on a tripod once in the whole film, and the rest of it was just handheld, and it works really good, and you can work fast. You can get more coverage, and again, you're not working with film, so you can't just do take after take after take. If you look at the statistics between the two films, it's shocking, the amount of footage that we wasted on the iPhone, and we had, I think, 4 rolls of 10 minutes of 16mm originally, so that's going to limit what you can do as well. So yeah, I think it's a combination of limitations and obviously having more experience and having better tools. Is it to the sort of level that I would expect from myself? No, but that's probably because it was a reimagining of a story that I did before. But as a piece of entertainment, I think it works very well, and I'm proud of that for that. And I'm just proud of going out there and making the film on practically nothing, sort of almost like a one-man band, and getting a result out of it. You know, anyone who says they want to be a filmmaker and is not making films, just isn't a filmmaker. Because if you're passionate about it, you know, you don't have to own an iPhone. You'll have an uncle, you'll have a dad, you'll have a mum, you'll have somebody who owns one, and they'll let you have their old one. You know, things aren't expensive as they were. There are places to rent equipment now that are so much easier and cheaper than they were. So with a very simple, basic, but good sound kit, and your iPhone on a pistol grip, which you buy for £10 on eBay, which is what I shot most of that film on. Again, I just think the most important thing about filmmaking is storytelling and performances. If you can get good actors, if you can get a good story, it doesn't really matter what you film it with. Yeah, go out and make a film.